CHistrue and happy Valentine's Day, and today we're going to celebrate love by talking about analytical philosophy and its limitations. I'm sure this video is going to be played at candlelit dinners all across the land in my smooth, soothing voice, so enjoy. And I hope I do not offend analytical philosophers because I have great respect for analytical philosophy. I've delved into it in this channel. I had a friend who recently departed who was, I consider to be, among the finest of analytical philosophers that I've ever known. And so, in a way, this is a tribute to this friend who passed by acknowledging what he acknowledged in his own life, and that is the limitations of analytical philosophy and the true pursuit of deep wisdom. Now, let me clarify as a ground rule. I respect analytical philosophy, and I'm not refuting it. I believe analytical philosophy is a powerful method. In particular, it's a powerful method for breaking down complex assumptions that one will find in continental philosophy, in spiritual philosophy, and political philosophy that become ways in which untrue claims become mixed in with true claims and that therefore muddy the waters. I think that analytical philosophy is a good method for breaking that down. But where is it incomplete? And I mean that in a Gödel sense. It seems as though analytical philosophy itself, if pursued to the utmost dedication to truth, shows its own incompleteness, not as a method, but as a fixed system of thought, presumably built around that method. In other words, not so much the idea that we must be analytical in analyzing our claims, but the idea that we must then accept those claims once they are, quote, analytically proven, given a certain set of assumptions, those claims as being the set of all truths. No, I'm not going to invoke Kurt Gödel as some kind of a cure-all argument to say, okay, we have fixed axioms that cannot contain all provable axioms. Therefore, analytical philosophy is incomplete. Therefore, I'm brilliant. Pwned. I'm not going to say that. That would ruin the love on this Valentine's Day. I'm not going to do that. A lot of you, I'm sure, watching this are analytical philosophers, analytical philosophy students, and I'm not going to insult your intelligence. However, with analytical philosophy always has to come the background cultural context. If you're going to talk about a given analytical philosopher, Bertrand Russell, for instance, was at the very apex of world empire at his time. Now, Bertrand Russell was somebody who had very forward and progressive ideas when it came to war, when it came to certain things. He had less progressive ideas when it came to elitism and certain assumptions of that nature. Again, he was complex like any human being. I think that he began his life probably very much as a British aristocrat or aristocratic figure, and then towards the end of his life, I think he began to question some of those earlier assumptions. Again, he's complicated, but the point is, I'm not simply going to take preposition A and then ignore the underlying cultural assumptions behind it. So, for instance, let's take a good example. Analytical philosophers will often say that continental philosophy has no actual practical application. They would say of a philosopher like Hegel, for instance, that his method has no, what's the word they would use? It's not predictive, or it's not falsifiable, or statements to that nature, citing Popper. However, I believe that not to be the truth. I believe that Hegel's method is in fact utilized by social policy experts, by planners. They present a pair of opposites, and then you find the synthesis between those opposites, and that synthesis is actually the desired outcome. Now, in the case of the Hegelians, both right and left, this was assumed to be historically progressive. But I think in the hands of these folks, they've inverted it and made it historically regressive, if you see the news. And so in a sense, they've turned Hegel on their heads, but not in the left Hegelian sense, but in maybe a much darker sense. So very clearly, continental philosophy, in its ability to address complexity, and its ability to handle a sense in which a certain preposition may have multiple meanings for multiple contexts, that's something that actually is very powerful in the hands of manipulators. Analytical philosophy, by the way, is a good method of breaking that down and decoding that. So I think that that's actually a very good thing. Analytical philosophy is a good method for seeing through the lies. But it may not be such a good method for understanding the nature of the lies, because understanding the nature of the lies in an intuitive sense requires that one have a broad-based view, and one understand things like culture, one understand things like the nature of sociology, which does not always rest on such logical assumptions. So far, again, to be very clear, I've delved into analytical philosophy. I've done analytical and mathematical philosophy. I've done that on this channel. And while I don't call myself an analytical philosopher by any means, except in an armchair sense, I have had as my teacher one among the great modern analytical philosophers, in my opinion, who's now departed from it very tragically. So let me give you an example of a possible limitation that could be a limitation. Let me break it down to something concrete. The tree is green. Statement. The tree is green. What is our refutation of that statement? What is our negation of that statement? Do we say it is not the case that the tree is green? Do we say the statement is false that the tree is green? Do we say that the tree is not green? A lot of that would depend on the context. What are we talking about if we say that the tree is not green? Do we mean it's autumn time? Do we mean that the tree is not entirely covered with green? We have a trunk there is brown. We have, in some cases, different colors of the trunk. Do we mean that I believe that there's some kind of a cedar or a spruce? No, I forget, but it's very bluish. I think that it's a spruce, if I'm not mistaken, that it has more of a bluish color to it. Do we mean that do we mean that there's no one definition of green? Do we mean that the tree absorbs every color, the leaves absorb every color but green, and that therefore the green we see is actually what's not part of the leaf? That could have any number of meanings depending on the context. And those contexts are given often, whether we realize it or not, by culture. We may say that such and such a culture is inherently more rational. For instance, Oxford, England, is inherently more rational than other cultures, and that could very well be true. And yet Oxford, England is, with all due respect, and I have all respect is due, Oxford, England is shaped by certain historical forces. Even its logic and its analytical philosophy is actually, I know it'll be pulling teeth to get them to admit this, but it's shaped by the religious heritage of Oxford and the medieval scholasticism. And indeed, the medieval scholasticism then became that which later intellectuals would rebel against. We're not going to have that religion around here, but it's still a cultural backdrop in which the logical traditions of the modern West arose, even if they rebelled against it and said, well, no, we're atheists now, okay, or we're philosophical materialists, or we're deists, or something of that nature. But they still have that in the back of their minds. Those cultures that do not have the strict battle of opposites may be deemed less logical, but what they actually have is they have a different kind of logic, a different cultural background in terms of what logic is. And so analytical philosophy is the great gift that, let's say, the Western culture has given. But to say that it is the only way of perceiving things is the height of cultural arrogance and irresponsibility. It violates the premises of analytical logic itself if you really take it to its utmost conclusions, that it will acknowledge its own limitations. So I love analytical philosophy. I enjoy it. I love analytical philosophers. You're great. But I'm just making a point that I think should be heard. Thank you.